I'm going to read something to you. Oh, it'll take literally seconds. And I want you to think about who may have said this. This is back in November 1980, right before the general election. November 1980. 1 year ago, Ronald Reagan was not my first choice for the Republican nomination. Howard Baker was. George Bush was my second choice. I did not know Reagan or many of his associates, and I was influenced in my assessment of him by assessments from people who I am now convinced do not know him adequately. So for this individual, Howard Baker was number one in the Republican primary in 1979, followed by George H.W. Bush. Reagan was third. Let's take a few calls. Let's see if anybody has any ideas on this. Steve, Allentown, Pennsylvania, the great WAEB. Did you hear me read that quote, Steve?
Yes, I did.
Who said that in 1980? Can you guess?
Boy, you're quizzing me.
No Googling anybody.
No Googling, no. I'm nowhere near a computer. I would say that would be Ed Meese.
Ed Meese?
No, he knew it. Ed Meese knew him.
Ed Meese worked for Ronald Reagan's election.
Yeah, he worked for him. No.
All right, you don't know. Well, stay tuned. I'll tell you later. Go ahead. What was your call?
All right, Mr. Justice Levin. I have a question. The Obama administration is illegally spending money on Obamacare in defiance of a court order. Is that correct?
So legally spending money, well, not now. They've just responded to the judge. They have filed the appeal.
All right. Well, up until this point, they had been doing that. They've been spending money in defiance of a court order.
Up until this point, they ignored a court order, correct?
Right. Back a few years ago, President Ronald Reagan was in trouble for spending money that was not authorized through the Congress.
Actually, that's not correct. You'll notice in Iran Contra, that's what you want to talk about?
Yeah.
Nobody was ever charged with violating any federal appropriation, any federal budget act, any federal authorizing bill. Did you notice that?
I understand that, and I agree.
Well, why was that?
That was because, in fact, there was no illegality. But I'm talking
there was not only no illegality, because if Congress or the prosecutor on behalf of Congress's view had pushed that separation of powers issue, Congress would have lost.
Right.
The president determines foreign policy. Congress determines appropriations. But if there are appropriations available that are not specified for a particular account, and the president chooses to use them in his constitutional duties, that's not unconstitutional. That is why, despite an independent counsel, despite all the liberal claptrap from members of Congress, the issue was never a criminal one.
And I fully agree with that. I'm bringing up that our current situation may be an actual condition.
Well, it would have been, in my humble opinion, except for the fact that the judge acted, and now they filed their appeal on the Obamacare case with the 11th Circuit in Atlanta, and they did that yesterday.
Okay. So,
but during the period from the time he ruled to that time, I agree with you.
Right. So
all right, my friend.
Why isn't there the same outcry?
You know why? Because the media are left-wing, and they do the bidding of the statist. The executive branch controls pretty much the prosecutorial mechanisms in this country. There are no independent counsel statutes anymore, and I'm glad about that, as a matter of fact. But the whole process is corrupted. All right, my friend, thank you. That's all I can tell you. Jerry, San Francisco, the great KSFO. Go.
Hi, Mark. I think that sounds like something Newt Gingrich would say.
What's that?
The quote that you read earlier.
Oh, right. No, Gingrich didn't say it. Let me read the quote again. The question is, and please don't Google it, folks, if you're going to call in. 1 year ago, Ronald Reagan was not my first choice for the Republican nomination. Howard Baker was. George Bush was my second choice. I did not know Reagan or many of his associates, and I was influenced in my assessment of him by assessments from people who I am now convinced did not know him adequately. So it was not Gingrich. Go ahead.
All right. I'll give up on that until somebody else comes along. I get a little upset with myself. Sometimes I'm slow on the uptake. So at age 65, I decided to go to law school. And I got through that okay, and I had some awakenings, but nothing has hit me upside the head until I got to administrative law. I mean, this thing hits me with a sledgehammer every day. This is like dying from bleeding from 1,000 cuts.
Yep.
And this is something that I know yesterday you said before you left you didn't know what you were going to talk about today. Boy, I'd like to see you go off on this someday and just explain, which you can do much better than I can after 3 months in a course, how this just eats us apart day by day by day. This is amazing. This whole thing.
Well, you know, I kind of do talk about it every day, and I've certainly written about it in Liberty and Tyranny. We have a fourth branch of government that's not authorized under the Constitution, and we call it the administrative state. And it's the Environmental Protection Agency doing what it does, and the Agriculture Department, all these departments and agencies with 1 to 2 million people who populate them. And they are every day spending their time developing and issuing regulations and rules for virtually every aspect of human behavior. That's how we get the toilets we get. That's how we get the light bulbs we get. That's how we get the cars that we get. And I could go on and on and on. And these federal regulations that they put out every year, not all at once, but they in the aggregate are about 75,000 pages. And it's the law of the land, and you're as compelled to comply with those regulations issued by faceless bureaucrats and massive bureaucracies as you are any other statute. And this thing just goes on and on and on. It builds on top of itself. That's why you've never heard of them cutting the workforce by 10%. The workforce keeps growing, and it's well paid for pushing you around and tormenting you and abusing you and telling you what to do. And I've said many times, Jerry, where does this end? What is it that the liberal is trying to create here? Where exactly are they taking us? Because it's clear to me that it is a rudderless ship. They're not sure where it's taking us, but they know they want to transform our society. So they unleash all these powers on us. And this is where we get cap and trade from. We have an unelected Supreme Court, 5 justices, issuing a ruling that is an outrage, twisting the Clean Air Act, basically telling the EPA, not directly, but telling them, you know, boys, go ahead, run with this if you want to regulate carbon dioxide. That is what we exhale after we inhale oxygen. And, of course, the EPA runs with it. It empowers itself. It keeps growing. It issues regulations. It keeps controlling more and more people, more and more industries. And that's just one agency. How'd I do?
Well, you got to start.
Right.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, this thing is just, it just grows and mutates.
Look, and I'll tell you what, and what you're talking about, Jerry, is how mind-boggling it is when you go to law school and you look at it, you go, oh, my God, what is all this stuff? And yet on the left, they view it as an enormous opportunity to avoid elections while opposing their agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, buddy. Thank you for your call. It is stunning. You know, folks, when you go to Washington, D.C., let's say you go to the Air and Space Museum or you want to go here or there, just look around you. These mammoth buildings. And keep in mind that every major city in the country has more of them. It is easier for me to tell you the departments, agencies, divisions, units, offices. It's easier for me to tell you what they do control in our lives than what they don't control. What they do try to influence in our lives rather than what they don't try to influence. And I've pointed this out many, many times. The government, the federal government, was supposed to be innocuous. And yet now it has plenary power, and it's in your face day in and day out. It's a scary thing. And I'm glad that gentleman called because in addition to dealing with budgets and spending, which is a mammoth task, we have to deal with the regulatory state, or the Rube Goldberg, as I referred to it over and over again, and it's in Liberty and Tyranny, and I didn't invent the term, but I've used it often, the Rube Goldberg bureaucracy that is strangling us. Obama added about 200,000 more bureaucrats. That's an enormous number of people. Think about that. He increased the bureaucracy by about 15% in less than 2 years. But they can't find anywhere to cut, ladies and gentlemen. Nowhere. They can't cut jobs. They can't cut programs, even though the GAO came up and talked about all the duplication and overlap. They're not cutting one. Not one. They can't cut spending despite 2 years of massive budget increases. And by a really sleazy play, they stuck $105 billion in appropriations in an authorizing bill, Obamacare, so that you couldn't reverse the decision of the last Congress even by changing the Congress. Now, if that's not tyranny, if that's not despotism, 2 strong words and I'm going to use them, damn it. If that's not tyranny and that's not despotism, then I don't know what the hell is. Certainly not in a republic. It's stunning. stunningly immoral and outrageous behavior by people who pretend to want to uphold the law, by people who pretend to take an oath to uphold the Constitution. They won't be punished for it. They won't even be admonished for it. They're cheered along for it. How clever they are. How wonderful they are. How compassionate they are for screwing up our country. All right, the quote is still out there. November 3rd, 1980. Do not Google it. One more time. Who said 1 year ago Ronald Reagan was not my first choice for the Republican nomination? Howard Baker was. George Bush was my second choice. Reagan being the third choice. All right, let me go to the callers, please. Matt, Nashville, Tennessee, the great WLAC, a Democrat. Go.
How you doing today, Mark?
All right, sir. Thank you.
I have a real problem with the Republican Party and their foreign policy issues. They're complaining that Obama is spending too much money and putting the country in debt, yet they're the ones that are advocating a foreign policy that spends $1 trillion a year. What do you have to say about that?
What do you mean they're the ones advocating? Sir, we were attacked. Let me educate you. This is getting very boring to me. It really is. Can't you at least come up with new talking points? We were attacked from Afghanistan, and we decided we wanted to do something about it. Let me ask you, sir, what would you have done after 9/11 exactly?
I would have not continued the same foreign
policy. No,
I
asked you, what would you have done after 9/11? Would you have not gone into Afghanistan, sir?
No, I would not have gone into Afghanistan.
Okay, you're a buffoon. You see, sir, that's the policy that caused the problem in the first place. Places where we were attacked, we didn't effectively respond, and we know from all the investigations and hearings now that that message was received by our enemy, so they attacked us. So your position is, when attacked, just duck. Thank you. Got it. You can get rid of the dummy. Just beautiful. Brilliant. So, going forward, ladies and gentlemen, as we try and talk about the massive deficit created by this president and Congress. Deficit, not debt. Other presidents have contributed to the debt as well, but nobody's done what this president has done, and he's proudly doing it. So why deny it? This president is the biggest spendthrift in world history, not just American history, in world history. I wish they had a spendthrift prize, like they have a Nobel Peace Prize, to give to a president, but they don't. And how in the hell do you compare redistributing wealth with a nation defending itself against terrorists? This is where liberalism has brought us, ladies and gentlemen. It's really insane. We'll be right back.